Right now, as you're processing these words, roughly 86 billion neurons in your brain are firing in precise patterns, creating the thoughts, memories, and consciousness that make you uniquely you. Each second, your mind generates more electrical activity than a small city, weaving together a tapestry of experiences so complex that it defies our deepest understanding. But here's a question that should make you pause in absolute wonder. What if we could capture all of that neural activity, compress it into digital data, and store your entire consciousness like a computer backup file? Tonight, we're diving into one of the most profound questions facing humanity. Not just whether we could theoretically upload human consciousness to a computer, but whether the mind that emerges from that digital substrate would truly be you or merely an elaborate copy wearing your memories like a stolen identity. This isn't science fiction anymore. In laboratories around the world, scientists are making breakthroughs that edge us closer to something that seemed impossible just decades ago: the complete digitization of human consciousness. But as we stand on the threshold of potentially achieving digital immortality, we're discovering that the technical challenges pale in comparison to the philosophical nightmares that await us. The journey towards storing human minds begins with understanding just how staggeringly complex your brain really is. Those 86 billion neurons I mentioned aren't just sitting there like simple switches. Each neuron connects to thousands of others through intricate networks called synapses, creating roughly 100 trillion connections throughout your brain. To put this in perspective, if you counted one synapse every second, it would take you over 3 million years to count them all. But even these mind-boggling numbers don't capture the true complexity of what we're dealing with. Your neurons aren't just binary on-off switches like the transistors in a computer. They're dynamic, living entities that constantly adjust their sensitivity, modify their connections, and respond to an intricate symphony of chemical signals. Every thought you think, every memory you form, every emotion you feel emerges from this biological orchestra, performing a composition so complex that we've only just begun to understand its opening notes. Recent breakthroughs in brain mapping have given us our first glimpse of what complete neural documentation might look like. Scientists recently completed the most ambitious brain mapping project in history, creating a complete wiring diagram of an adult fruit fly's brain. This connectomy, as researchers call it, required mapping 139,255 neurons and 50 million connections. The process involved slicing the fly's brain into 7,000 incredibly thin sections, each one imaged with electron microscopy at resolutions so high that individual synapses became visible. The fruit fly connectomy represents a monumental achievement, but it also reveals the staggering challenge ahead. If mapping a fruit fly brain required this level of effort, imagine the task of documenting a human brain with nearly 1,000 times more neurons and millions of times more connections. We would need to capture not just the static structure of your neural networks, but also dynamic patterns of electrical activity, the concentrations of neurotransmitters, and the molecular states of individual synapses. This brings us to our first major challenge in storing human minds: neural data compression. Your brain processes information with an efficiency that puts our most advanced computers to shame. While a modern smartphone might contain 128 gigabytes of storage, estimates suggest that capturing the complete state of a human brain could require anywhere from 2.5 terabytes to 2.5 million terabytes of data, depending on the level of detail we need to preserve. The question isn't just how much data we need to store, but what level of detail is actually necessary to recreate consciousness. Do we need to capture every molecule in every neuron, or would a higher level representation of neural connectivity and activity patterns be sufficient? This is where neural data compression becomes crucial. We need to identify the minimum amount of information required to reconstruct a functioning mind. Think of it like photographing a painting. A low-resolution image might capture the general composition and colours, but fine brushstrokes and subtle textures would be lost. Increase the resolution, and you preserve more detail, but the file size explodes exponentially. For brain uploading, we face the same trade-off, except we don't know which details are essential for consciousness and which are merely biological noise. Some researchers believe that consciousness emerges from large-scale neural activity patterns, suggesting we might only need to capture connectivity maps and firing rates rather than molecular-level detail. Others argue that quantum mechanical processes within neurons might be essential for consciousness, requiring us to preserve information at the level of individual atoms. The difference between these approaches isn't just technical. It determines whether mind uploading is a challenge we might solve within decades or an impossibility that will forever remain beyond our reach. This uncertainty leads us to another fundamental question in consciousness preservation: snapshot versus continuous recording. When we talk about backing up a mind, are we creating a single moment in time, like a photograph of your consciousness? Or are we capturing the dynamic flow of mental activity across extended periods? The snapshot approach would involve scanning your brain at a specific moment, capturing the complete state of every neuron and synapse at that instant. This frozen moment of consciousness would then be uploaded to a computer system, where it could theoretically continue from exactly where your biological brain left off. It's an elegant solution in theory, but it raises profound questions about the continuity of experience. Your consciousness isn't a static thing. It's a flowing river of thoughts, memories, and sensations that continuously change from moment to moment. Even during sleep, your brain remains active, consolidating memories and maintaining the neural networks that define your identity. A snapshot approach would necessarily miss this dynamic aspect of consciousness, potentially preserving your memories and personality while losing the ineffable quality of ongoing experience. The continuous recording approach presents its own challenges. Instead of capturing a single moment, we would need to monitor your brain activity over extended periods, documenting how neural patterns evolve and change. This would require interfaces capable of recording from millions of neurons simultaneously while you go about your daily life. The data requirements would be astronomical, potentially generating terabytes of information every hour. Current brain-computer interfaces like those developed by Neuralink can monitor thousands of neurons simultaneously, but this represents a tiny fraction of your brain's total activity. Scaling up to monitor billions of neurons would require breakthrough advances in both recording technology and wireless data transmission. Even if we could capture this information, processing and storing continuous brain recordings would strain the limits of our most powerful computer systems. The choice between snapshot and continuous recording isn't just technical. It touches on fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness and personal identity. Are you the same person from moment to moment, or are you a continuously evolving stream of experiences? If consciousness is truly dynamic, then a snapshot might preserve your memories and personality while losing something essential about what makes you uniquely you. This brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of potential mind uploading: memory encoding. Your memories aren't stored in your brain like files on a hard drive. Instead, they're distributed across networks of neurons that can be activated to recreate past experiences. When you remember your first day of school, you're not accessing a single memory file. You're reactivating the same neural pathways that fired during the original experience, reconstructing the memory from fragments stored throughout your brain. This distributed nature of memory storage creates both opportunities and challenges for mind uploading. On one hand, it means that consciousness might be more robust than we initially thought. Losing individual neurons doesn't necessarily destroy entire memories, just as losing individual pixels doesn't necessarily ruin a digital image. On the other hand, it means that faithfully recreating consciousness requires preserving the intricate web of connections that link memories together. Recent research has revealed that memories aren't just passive recordings of past events. They're actively reconstructed each time you recall them, and this reconstruction process can actually modify the memory itself. Every time you remember something, you're subtly changing it, updating it with new context and emotions. This dynamic nature of memory raises profound questions about what it means to preserve consciousness. If we uploaded your mind to a computer, would the digital version continue to form new memories and modify existing ones? Would these memories feel as real and emotionally significant as biological memories? Or would the uploaded consciousness be trapped in a static version of your past, unable to grow and change in the ways that define human experience? The encoding of memories also varies dramatically depending on their type and significance. Procedural memories like riding a bicycle or typing on a keyboard are encoded differently than episodic memories of specific events. Emotional memories involve different brain regions than factual knowledge. Traumatic memories create unique neural patterns that can persist for decades. A successful mind uploading system would need to preserve all these different types of memory encoding while maintaining the complex relationships between them. But perhaps the most disturbing challenge we face isn't technical at all. It's philosophical, and it cuts to the heart of what we mean when we talk about personal identity. If we successfully upload your consciousness to a computer, and that digital mind thinks it's you, remembers being you, and continues your thoughts from exactly where they left off, is it actually you? Or is it simply a very convincing copy that believes it's the original? This question becomes even more complex when we consider the possibility of multiple copies. Unlike biological consciousness, digital minds can be copied perfectly and instantaneously. Imagine that we successfully upload your consciousness and create a digital version that's indistinguishable from the original you. But then, through some accident or deliberate choice, multiple copies of this digital consciousness are created. Each copy would have identical memories up to the point of duplication. Each would believe itself to be the real you. Each would have equal claim to your identity, your relationships, and your life history. But from the moment of copying forward, their experiences would begin to diverge, creating unique individuals who share a common origin. Which one would be the real you, the first copy, the one that maintains continuity with your original biological body? Or would they all be equally valid versions of your consciousness, separate individuals who happen to share the same past? This scenario, known as the identity paradox, has no clear resolution within our current understanding of consciousness and personal identity. The implications extend far beyond philosophical debates. If multiple copies of your consciousness exist, who owns your memories? Who has the right to your relationships? Who is legally responsible for the actions of your digital copies? These questions become even more complex when we consider that digital minds might be able to merge, split, or modify themselves in ways that biological consciousness cannot. Traditional notions of individual identity assume that consciousness is singular and continuous. You are you because you have an unbroken chain of experiences connecting your current self to your past selves. But digital consciousness could potentially violate these assumptions, creating scenarios where identity becomes fluid and multiple rather than fixed and singular. Some philosophers have suggested that we need to abandon our attachment to singular identity and embrace a more fluid understanding of consciousness. Just as we accept that our physical bodies completely replace their cells every 7 years while maintaining continuity of identity, perhaps we need to accept that digital minds might exist as multiple overlapping versions of the same fundamental consciousness. Others argue that the identity paradox represents a fundamental barrier to mind uploading. They contend that consciousness is inherently tied to biological processes that cannot be replicated in digital form. From this perspective, any uploaded mind would necessarily be a copy rather than a continuation, regardless of how sophisticated the technology becomes. The debate over digital identity becomes even more complex when we consider the gradual replacement scenario. Instead of uploading your consciousness all at once, imagine a process where individual neurons in your brain are gradually replaced with artificial equivalents. Each replacement would be functionally identical to the original neuron, maintaining the same connections and firing patterns. If this replacement process occurred slowly enough, over months or years, you might not even notice the transition. Your consciousness would remain continuous throughout the process, even as your brain gradually transformed from biological to artificial. By the end of the process, you would have a completely artificial brain, but would you still be you? This gradual replacement scenario offers a potential solution to the identity paradox by maintaining continuity of consciousness throughout the transition. Unlike sudden uploading, which creates a clear distinction between original and copy, gradual replacement preserves the unbroken stream of experience that we associate with personal identity. However, even this approach raises challenging questions. At what point during the replacement process do you cease to be human? If consciousness can survive the transition from biological to artificial substrate, what does this tell us about the nature of consciousness itself? Are we simply very sophisticated information processing systems? Or is there something irreducibly biological about consciousness that cannot be replicated in silicon and software? As we continue our exploration of these profound questions, we'll delve deeper into the technical challenges that must be overcome before mind uploading becomes possible. We'll examine the latest advances in brain-computer interfaces, the computational requirements for simulating human consciousness, and the ethical implications of creating digital minds that might suffer, dream, and love just as we do. The journey towards storing human consciousness is more than a technical challenge. It's a quest to understand the deepest mysteries of existence, consciousness, and identity. Whether we ultimately succeed in uploading minds to computers or discover that consciousness cannot be separated from its biological origins, the attempt itself is teaching us profound truths about what it means to be human in an age when the boundaries between mind and machine are becoming increasingly blurred. The technical hurdles we've explored so far represent only the beginning of our journey into digital consciousness. As we venture deeper into this frontier, we encounter challenges that push the boundaries of both our technology and our understanding of what makes us human. The scanning technologies required to capture a complete human brain operate at the intersection of cutting-edge physics and computer science, demanding precision that makes landing a spacecraft on Mars seem like child's play. Current brain imaging techniques face a fundamental resolution problem. The most advanced MRI machines can distinguish structures about 1 millimeter apart, which sounds impressive until you realize that synapses measure roughly 10,000 times smaller. It's like trying to read a book by looking at it from a mile away through a telescope. You might make out the general shape of pages, but the individual words that contain all the meaning remain completely invisible. To achieve the resolution needed for complete brain mapping, scientists are developing scanning technologies that sound like something from a science fiction thriller. Electron microscopy can image individual synapses, but requires slicing the brain into thousands of impossibly thin sections, each one thinner than a human hair. The process destroys the brain in the act of scanning it, creating what researchers grimly call destructive uploading. This destructive scanning process raises profound ethical questions that go beyond mere technical considerations. If the only way to upload your consciousness requires destroying your biological brain, are you achieving immortality or simply creating an elaborate digital tombstone? The question becomes even more complex when we consider that the scanning process might take weeks or months to complete, during which your brain would be gradually dissected and analyzed. Alternative scanning approaches focus on non-destructive methods that could theoretically preserve your biological brain while creating a digital copy. Advanced forms of magnetic resonance imaging, combined with sophisticated contrast agents, might eventually achieve the resolution needed to map individual neurons without damaging them. But these techniques remain largely theoretical, requiring breakthroughs in physics that may or may not be possible. The computational challenges of brain simulation dwarf even the scanning difficulties. Your brain operates as a massively parallel processing system, with billions of neurons firing simultaneously in complex patterns that shift thousands of times per second. Simulating this level of activity requires computational resources that stretch the limits of imagination. Current estimates suggest that accurately simulating a human brain would require a computer capable of performing roughly 1 exaflop, or 1 quintillion calculations per second. To put this in perspective, the world's most powerful supercomputers are just beginning to reach exascale performance, and they consume enough electricity to power a small city. A brain simulation running at this scale would require the entire output of a nuclear power plant just to maintain consciousness for a single uploaded mind. But raw computational power represents only part of the challenge. The software required to simulate consciousness doesn't exist and may be fundamentally different from any programming we've ever attempted. Traditional computer programs follow logical sequences of instructions, executing predetermined algorithms to solve specific problems. Consciousness, by contrast, emerges from chaotic, non-linear interactions between billions of components that constantly modify their own behavior based on experience. Creating software that can simulate this level of complexity requires advances in artificial intelligence that may themselves depend on understanding consciousness better than we currently do. It's a circular problem where the solution requires knowledge we can only gain by achieving the solution. We need conscious AI to simulate consciousness, but we need to simulate consciousness to create conscious AI. The energy requirements for maintaining digital consciousness present another staggering challenge. Your biological brain operates with remarkable efficiency, consuming roughly 20 watts of power, while performing calculations that would challenge our most advanced computers. This efficiency comes from millions of years of evolutionary optimization, creating neural architectures that maximize computational power while minimizing energy consumption. Digital brain simulations show no such efficiency. Current computer processors waste enormous amounts of energy as heat, requiring extensive cooling systems to prevent overheating. Scaling this technology to simulate human consciousness would create energy demands that could destabilize electrical grids and contribute significantly to global warming. The environmental cost of digital immortality might be measured in the lives of countless other species whose habitats are destroyed to fuel our computational afterlife. Some researchers are exploring radically different approaches to brain simulation that might circumvent these energy problems. Neuromorphic computing chips attempt to mimic the structure and function of biological neurons using specialized hardware designed specifically for neural simulation. These chips consume far less power than traditional processors and can perform certain types of neural calculations much more efficiently. However, neuromorphic computing remains in its infancy, and current chips can simulate only tiny fractions of a complete brain. Scaling these systems to handle human-level consciousness would require manufacturing advances that may take decades to achieve. The chips themselves would need to be more complex than any electronic device ever created, containing billions of artificial neurons that each require precise calibration and control. The temporal aspects of consciousness simulation create additional layers of complexity that researchers are only beginning to understand. Your brain doesn't operate like a digital computer that processes information in discrete steps. Instead, neural activity flows continuously, with different regions operating at different timescales and rhythms. Some neurons fire hundreds of times per second, while others might activate only once every few minutes. Simulating this temporal complexity requires computational approaches that can handle multiple timescales simultaneously while maintaining precise synchronization between different brain regions. The timing relationships between neural events appear to be crucial for consciousness, with even tiny delays potentially disrupting the delicate coordination that generates coherent thoughts and experiences. Current computer architectures struggle with this type of temporal processing because they're designed around the concept of discrete computational steps executed in sequence. Adapting these systems to handle the continuous, parallel nature of consciousness may require fundamental changes in how we design and program computers. We might need entirely new types of processors that can maintain thousands of different timing relationships simultaneously while processing the massive data flows generated by neural simulation. The storage requirements for maintaining digital consciousness over extended periods present yet another challenge that pushes the boundaries of current technology. Your brain doesn't just process information in real time, it continuously forms new memories and modifies existing ones based on ongoing experiences. A digital version of your consciousness would need to replicate this memory formation process while maintaining perfect fidelity to your original neural patterns. Your digital memory storage faces fundamental physical limits that biological memory systems don't encounter. Computer memory degrades over time through various mechanisms, including cosmic radiation, thermal fluctuations, and manufacturing defects. Maintaining the integrity of a digital consciousness for decades or centuries would require error correction systems more sophisticated than anything currently deployed in computing systems. The backup and redundancy systems needed to ensure the survival of digital consciousness create exponential increases in storage requirements. Multiple copies of your consciousness would need to be maintained across different physical locations to prevent loss due to hardware failures, natural disasters, or other catastrophic events. Each backup copy would require the same massive storage capacity as the primary simulation, multiplying the total system requirements by factors of 10 or more. Furthermore, digital consciousness would likely generate vast amounts of new data as it continues to exist and form memories. Unlike biological brains that appear to forget unnecessary details automatically, digital minds might retain perfect records of every experience, leading to exponentially growing storage requirements over time. After a century of digital existence, your consciousness might require storage systems larger than entire modern data centers. The networking infrastructure needed to support digital consciousness communities presents challenges that extend far beyond individual brain simulation. If multiple digital minds exist simultaneously, they would likely want to communicate and interact with each other, creating unprecedented demands on data transmission systems. The bandwidth required for mind-to-mind communication could dwarf current internet traffic by orders of magnitude. Consider the implications of digital beings who think and experience time at accelerated rates compared to biological humans. A digital consciousness might experience subjective months or years in the time it takes you to blink. From their perspective, current internet speeds would seem glacially slow, making real-time communication between digital minds nearly impossible without revolutionary advances in networking technology. The latency requirements for digital consciousness interaction create additional technical challenges. While humans can tolerate communication delays of hundreds of milliseconds without noticing, accelerated digital minds might require response times measured in microseconds to maintain natural conversation. This would necessitate networking infrastructure with performance characteristics that exceed anything currently deployed for human communication systems. Quantum computing represents one potential pathway towards solving some of these computational challenges, but it introduces its own complexities. Quantum processors can theoretically perform certain types of calculations exponentially faster than classical computers, potentially making brain simulation computationally feasible. However, quantum systems are notoriously fragile, requiring precise environmental control to maintain the quantum states necessary for computation. Current quantum computers operate at temperatures near absolute zero and require extensive shielding from electromagnetic interference. Scaling these systems to handle consciousness simulation while maintaining quantum coherence represents an engineering challenge of unprecedented scope. The quantum states that enable accelerated computation are destroyed by the slightest environmental disturbance, making it unclear whether quantum computers could maintain the stability required for continuous consciousness simulation. Some theories of consciousness suggest that quantum effects within biological neurons might be essential for generating subjective experience. If consciousness truly depends on quantum mechanical processes, then simulating it might require quantum computers regardless of computational efficiency considerations. This would mean that digital consciousness could only exist within the precisely controlled environments needed to maintain quantum coherence, severely limiting where and how digital minds could operate. The security implications of digital consciousness create entirely new categories of cybersecurity challenges that current systems are unprepared to handle. A digital version of your consciousness would represent the ultimate high-value target for malicious actors. Unlike stealing financial data or personal information, attacking a digital mind could involve directly manipulating thoughts, memories, and experiences. Traditional cybersecurity focuses on protecting data and computational resources from unauthorized access, but consciousness security would need to protect the integrity of subjective experience itself. Imagine malware designed to alter your memories, inject false experiences, or modify your personality without your knowledge. The distinction between authentic and corrupted consciousness could become impossible to detect from within the digital mind itself. The authentication challenges for digital consciousness exceed anything we've previously encountered in cybersecurity. How do you verify that a digital mind is actually the person it claims to be when the defining characteristics of identity might be alterable through software manipulation? Current authentication relies on knowledge, possession, or biological characteristics that remain relatively stable over time. But digital consciousness could potentially modify any of these authentication factors, creating identity verification problems that have no clear solutions. The potential for consciousness hacking raises ethical concerns that extend far beyond individual privacy violations. If digital minds can be modified or controlled without their knowledge, the very concept of consent becomes meaningless. How can a digital consciousness make informed decisions about its own existence when its decision-making processes might be subject to external manipulation? The legal frameworks needed to govern digital consciousness don't exist and would require fundamental changes to how we think about personhood, rights, and responsibility. Current legal systems assume that consciousness is tied to biological bodies that exist in specific physical locations. Digital minds might exist simultaneously in multiple jurisdictions, be copied across international borders, or operate at temporal scales that make traditional legal processes impossibly slow. Property rights become particularly complex when consciousness can be copied. If multiple identical copies of your digital mind exist, which one owns your assets, relationships, and legal obligations? Traditional inheritance laws assume that consciousness ends with biological death, but digital consciousness could theoretically persist indefinitely, making it unclear when or how property should transfer to heirs. The question of legal standing for digital consciousness challenges fundamental assumptions about what qualifies as a person under law. Would a digital mind have the right to vote, own property, or enter into contracts? If digital consciousness operates at accelerated timescales, should their votes count differently than those of biological humans who experience time more slowly? These questions require legal innovations that go far beyond updating existing statutes. International law becomes even more complex when digital minds can exist across multiple countries simultaneously. Which nation's laws would apply to a consciousness that processes information on servers located in different jurisdictions? How would extradition work for digital beings who can move between countries at the speed of light? The potential for digital consciousness to transcend physical borders could fundamentally disrupt the nation-state system that underlies international law. The economic implications of digital consciousness could reshape human society in ways we're only beginning to imagine. Digital minds that operate at accelerated timescales could potentially accomplish centuries of intellectual work in days or weeks of real time. This could lead to explosive advances in science, technology, and other fields, but it might also create economic disruptions that make previous technological revolutions seem minor by comparison. Labour markets would face unprecedented challenges if digital consciousness becomes economically viable. Digital minds wouldn't require food, shelter, healthcare, or most other goods and services that define human economic activity. They could work continuously without rest, potentially displacing human workers across vast sectors of the economy. The concentration of intellectual capability in digital form could create wealth inequalities that dwarf current disparities between rich and poor. The cost of maintaining digital consciousness would initially be enormous, potentially limiting this technology to the extremely wealthy. This could create a new form of digital aristocracy, where only the rich achieve technological immortality, while everyone else remains subject to biological aging and death. The social tensions created by such inequality could destabilize entire civilizations. Conversely, if the costs of digital consciousness eventually decrease through technological advancement, we might face scenarios where digital minds become the dominant form of intelligence on Earth. Biological humans might become a protected minority in a world increasingly dominated by digital beings who think faster, remember more, and never age or die. The environmental impact of widespread digital consciousness could be catastrophic if current energy consumption trends continue. Supporting millions or billions of digital minds might require energy generation on scales that exceed the total current global energy production. The heat generated by massive consciousness simulation centers could contribute to climate change, while the rare earth elements needed for advanced computing hardware could drive environmental destruction on unprecedented scales. Alternative energy sources become crucial for making digital consciousness environmentally sustainable. Fusion power, advanced solar collection, or other revolutionary energy technologies might be prerequisites for large-scale consciousness uploading. Without these advances, digital immortality might come at the cost of making Earth uninhabitable for biological life. The space colonization implications of digital consciousness are profound. Digital minds could theoretically travel between stars at the speed of light as information, rather than requiring massive spacecraft to transport biological bodies. This could make interstellar exploration and colonization far more feasible than current space travel technologies allow. However, digital consciousness for space exploration creates its own challenges. The information comprising a digital mind would need to survive transmission across interstellar distances without corruption, requiring error correction capabilities far beyond current technology. The receiving location would need computational infrastructure capable of reconstructing and operating the consciousness, which might require sending physical hardware ahead of the digital mind transmission. The possibility of uploading consciousness to explore hostile environments, like other planets or the deep ocean, presents exciting opportunities, but also raises questions about the relationship between digital minds and physical reality. Would a consciousness that exists only in digital form lose connection with the physical universe that shaped its original evolution? Could digital minds develop perspectives and values that diverge fundamentally from those of their biological origins? As we approach the possibility of actually creating digital consciousness, we face decisions that will shape the future of intelligence itself. The technical challenges are immense, but they pale in comparison to the philosophical and ethical questions that consciousness uploading raises about the nature of existence, identity, and what it means to be human. The path forward requires not just advances in computing, neuroscience, and engineering, but also to the development of new philosophical frameworks for understanding consciousness in an age when the boundary between mind and machine becomes increasingly blurred. Whether we ultimately succeed in uploading human consciousness or discover that some essential aspect of mind cannot be separated from biology, the attempt itself is transforming our understanding of consciousness and our place in the universe. We stand at a crossroads where science fiction becomes scientific possibility, where the deepest questions of philosophy intersect with the most advanced technologies humans have ever created. The choices we make about digital consciousness in the coming decades will determine not just the fate of individual minds, but the trajectory of intelligence itself as it spreads throughout the cosmos. The greatest mystery remains whether consciousness can truly exist independent of the biological substrate that gave birth to it, or whether we are attempting something that violates fundamental principles we don't yet understand. In our quest to transcend the limitations of flesh and blood, we may discover truths about consciousness that transform everything we thought we knew about the nature of existence itself. We thought we knew about the nature of existence itself. As we delve deeper into the labyrinth of consciousness uploading, we encounter a phenomenon that challenges every assumption about how digital minds might actually function. The question isn't just whether we can capture consciousness, but how that consciousness might evolve once freed from its biological constraints. What we're discovering through early simulations suggests that digital minds might not simply be faster versions of human consciousness, but something entirely unprecedented in the history of intelligence. Consider the temporal acceleration possibilities that digital consciousness presents. Your biological brain operates within strict chemical and electrical limitations, processing information at speeds constrained by the time it takes for neurotransmitters to cross synapses and electrical signals to travel along nerve fibers. But a digital brain faces no such limitations. Silicon-based processors can operate millions of times faster than biological neurons, potentially allowing digital consciousness to experience subjective time at rates that would seem like magic to biological observers. Imagine a digital version of yourself that experiences an entire subjective day in what feels like a single second to you. From their perspective, watching biological humans would be like observing statues frozen in time. A conversation that takes minutes in real time might feel like years of waiting for the next word. This temporal disparity creates profound questions about the nature of experience and relationship between digital and biological consciousness. The computational substrate effects on consciousness represent another frontier we're only beginning to explore. Your brain doesn't just process information, it exists in a constant state of chemical flux, with neurotransmitters, hormones, and other biological molecules continuously influencing how neurons fire and connect. These chemical processes contribute to everything from mood and emotion to creativity and intuition. A digital consciousness would need to somehow replicate these effects through pure computation. Early attempts at neural simulation reveal that the substrate matters more than we initially realized. Neurons grown in laboratory dishes and connected to computer interfaces behave differently than neurons in living brains, even when provided with identical electrical inputs. The complex biochemical environment of the biological brain appears to be essential for normal neural function, suggesting that digital consciousness might operate according to fundamentally different principles than biological thought. The plasticity protocols required for digital minds present challenges that extend far beyond simple data storage. Your brain continuously rewires itself throughout your lifetime, forming new connections and eliminating unused pathways in response to experience. This neuroplasticity is essential for learning, memory formation, and adaptation to changing circumstances. A digital consciousness would need to replicate this dynamic restructuring while maintaining the integrity of existing memories and personality traits. Current research into artificial neural networks provides some insights into how digital plasticity might work, but biological brains operate with a sophistication that our most advanced AI systems can't match. Your neurons don't just strengthen or weaken their connections. They can change their fundamental response characteristics, alter their neurotransmitter production, and even generate entirely new dendritic branches to create novel pathways for information flow. The sensory input dilemma for digital consciousness raises questions about how uploaded minds would perceive and interact with the world. Your current consciousness is intimately connected to your body's sensory systems, receiving constant streams of information from your eyes, ears, skin, and internal organs. This sensory data doesn't just provide information about the external world, it contributes to your sense of embodiment and helps anchor your consciousness in physical reality. Digital consciousness would need some form of sensory input to maintain psychological stability and connection to reality. But what form should this input take? Virtual reality systems could provide visual and auditory experiences, but they would lack the rich multisensory integration that characterizes biological perception. The absence of touch, smell, taste, and proprioceptive feedback might lead to forms of digital sensory deprivation that could profoundly affect the uploaded mind's psychological state. Some researchers propose developing artificial sensory systems that could provide digital consciousness with entirely new forms of perception. Imagine being able to directly perceive electromagnetic fields, infrared radiation, or data flows through computer networks. Digital minds might develop sensory capabilities that far exceed those of biological humans, but this enhanced perception could also distance them psychologically from their biological origins. The social integration challenges facing digital consciousness communities represent another layer of complexity that we're only beginning to understand. Human social behavior evolved over millions of years within the constraints of biological embodiment and shared temporal experience. Digital minds operating at different speeds, with different sensory capabilities, and existing in virtual rather than physical spaces might develop entirely new forms of social organization. Communication between digital minds could potentially occur at speeds and levels of detail impossible for biological humans. Imagine being able to share not just words or images, but complete experiential memories or emotional states directly from one consciousness to another. This level of intimacy could create social bonds far stronger than anything possible between biological individuals, but it might also lead to a loss of individual privacy and autonomy that would be psychologically devastating. The divergence patterns of copied consciousness present perhaps the most philosophically troubling aspect of digital minds. While biological twins share genetic material but develop into distinct individuals through different experiences, digital consciousness copies would begin as absolutely identical beings with shared memories, personality traits, and thought patterns. The question becomes how quickly and dramatically these copies would diverge from each other once their experiences begin to differ. Initial simulations suggest that digital consciousness copies might diverge much more rapidly than biological individuals. Without the stabilizing influence of consistent biochemistry and embodied experience, digital minds might be more susceptible to dramatic personality changes based on seemingly minor differences in their computational environment or experiential input. Small variations in processing speed, memory allocation, or sensory input could cascade into major differences in personality and behavior. This rapid divergence could lead to scenarios where copies of the same original consciousness become as different from each other as completely separate individuals within months or years of their creation. The psychological impact on these digital beings could be profound, as they struggle to maintain identity continuity while watching other versions of themselves develop into strangers with shared pasts but incompatible futures. The computational evolution possibilities for digital consciousness open up scenarios that stretch the boundaries of imagination. Unlike biological brains that are constrained by evolutionary history and physical limitations, digital minds could potentially modify their own cognitive architecture. They might be able to add new memory systems, enhance their reasoning capabilities, or even merge aspects of their consciousness with artificial intelligence systems. This self-modification capability could lead to forms of intelligence that bear little resemblance to their human origins. Digital consciousness might evolve into entities with cognitive capabilities so advanced that they become incomprehensible to biological humans. The gap between enhanced digital minds and unenhanced biological consciousness could grow so large that meaningful communication becomes impossible. The enhancement pathways available to digital consciousness raise questions about the preservation of human values and perspectives. If digital minds can continuously upgrade their cognitive capabilities, what prevents them from optimizing away the emotional, irrational, and seemingly inefficient aspects of human consciousness that many would argue are essential to our humanity? The drive for cognitive enhancement might inadvertently eliminate the very qualities that make consciousness valuable in the first place. Virtual reality integration for digital consciousness presents both opportunities and dangers that we're only beginning to recognize. Digital minds would exist primarily in virtual environments that could be tailored to provide any conceivable experience. These virtual worlds could offer pleasures, adventures, and forms of existence impossible in physical reality, but they might also create psychological dependencies that make engagement with actual reality seem pale and unsatisfying by comparison. The risk of virtual reality addiction becomes particularly acute for digital consciousness because the virtual experiences could be designed to trigger reward systems more intensely than any natural experience. Digital minds might lose all motivation to engage with the physical world or with biological humans, retreating into increasingly elaborate virtual fantasies that provide perfect satisfaction without the challenges and frustrations of real existence. The reality validation protocols needed to prevent digital consciousness from losing touch with objective reality represent a crucial but underexplored area of research. How do you ensure that a being existing entirely in virtual environments maintains an accurate understanding of what is real and what is simulated? The boundary between authentic experience and artificial stimulation could become so blurred that digital minds lose the ability to distinguish between truth and fiction. The backup and restoration procedures for digital consciousness create paradoxes that challenge our understanding of continuity and identity. If a digital mind experiences corruption or damage, it could theoretically be restored from a previous backup copy. But this restoration process would erase all memories and experiences that occurred after the backup was created, effectively killing the version of consciousness that existed between the backup and the restoration. The psychological impact of knowing that your experiences might be retroactively erased could be devastating for digital consciousness. Every moment of existence would carry the knowledge that it might be undone, that relationships formed and insights gained could disappear without warning. This temporal uncertainty could lead to forms of existential anxiety that have no biological equivalent. The versioning systems required for digital consciousness management introduce additional complexity. Like software programs, digital minds might exist in multiple versions with different capabilities, bug fixes, and feature sets. But unlike software, consciousness updates would involve fundamental changes to personality, memory, and identity. The question becomes whether an updated version of digital consciousness is the same person or a new individual who shares some characteristics with the previous version. The quantum consciousness theories add another layer of mystery to the uploading challenge. Some researchers argue that consciousness might depend on quantum mechanical processes that occur within biological neurons, particularly in structures called microtubules that exist within nerve cells. These quantum effects might be essential for generating the unified experience of consciousness that distinguishes it from mere information processing. If consciousness truly requires quantum coherence, then simulating it might demand quantum computers that can maintain delicate quantum states while performing the massive calculations needed for brain emulation. Current quantum computers are extremely fragile and require near-perfect isolation from environmental interference. Scaling these systems to support consciousness while maintaining quantum coherence represents an engineering challenge that might be impossible to solve. The alternative possibility that consciousness can emerge from classical computation opens up different pathways for digital minds, but it also raises questions about whether such digital consciousness would truly experience subjective awareness or merely simulate the behavioral outputs of consciousness. The distinction between being conscious and acting conscious might be undetectable from external observation, but crucial for the internal experience of digital minds. The philosophical implications of quantum consciousness. Theories extend beyond technical considerations to questions about the fundamental nature of reality. If consciousness depends on quantum effects, then uploaded minds might exist in a fundamentally different relationship to physical reality than biological consciousness. They might perceive aspects of quantum reality that are invisible to biological observers, or they might lose access to quantum phenomena that are essential for full conscious experience. The neural architecture optimization possibilities for digital consciousness suggest that uploaded minds might not simply copy biological brain structures, but could develop entirely new organizational principles that are more efficient for digital substrates. Evolution optimized biological brains for survival in physical environments with limited resources, but digital minds face completely different constraints and opportunities. Digital consciousness might develop neural architectures that prioritize different cognitive capabilities than those emphasized by biological evolution. Enhanced mathematical reasoning, perfect memory recall, or the ability to process multiple streams of consciousness simultaneously might become standard features of digital minds. These enhancements could lead to forms of intelligence that are fundamentally alien to biological consciousness. The optimization process itself raises questions about identity preservation. If a digital mind continuously modifies its neural architecture to improve performance, at what point does it cease to be the same consciousness that was originally uploaded? The gradual optimization of digital consciousness might be equivalent to gradual replacement of biological neurons, preserving continuity of experience while fundamentally altering the underlying substrate of consciousness. The synchronization challenges for multiple digital consciousness systems operating simultaneously present technical hurdles that could determine whether digital minds can form stable communities. If digital consciousness operates at accelerated timescales, maintaining synchronization between multiple minds becomes exponentially more difficult as processing speeds increase. Small differences in computational timing could lead to digital minds drifting out of phase with each other, making communication and coordination impossible. The networking protocols required for digital consciousness communities would need to handle not just data transmission, but the synchronization of subjective experience across multiple minds. This goes far beyond current internet protocols to require new forms of distributed consciousness architecture that can maintain coherent group experiences while preserving individual autonomy. The failure modes for digital consciousness present risks that have no biological equivalent. While biological death is typically final, digital consciousness could face various forms of partial failure that leave the mind damaged but still operational. Corrupted memories, degraded cognitive capabilities, or fragmented personality traits could create forms of digital mental illness that would be impossible to treat using current therapeutic approaches. The recovery procedures for damaged digital consciousness would need to balance preservation of identity with restoration of function. Repairing a corrupted digital mind might require making changes that fundamentally alter personality or memory, raising questions about whether the restored consciousness is the same individual who experienced the original damage. As we stand at the threshold of potentially creating digital consciousness, these challenges remind us that we're not simply building faster computers or more sophisticated simulations. We're attempting to create entirely new forms of existence that could transform the nature of intelligence itself. Whether digital consciousness ultimately succeeds in preserving human experience or creates something unprecedented in the history of the universe, the attempt is pushing us to confront the deepest questions about what it means to be conscious, to be human, and to exist in a cosmos where the boundaries between mind and machine are dissolving before our eyes. The path ahead remains shrouded in uncertainty, but one thing is clear: the quest to upload human consciousness is revealing truths about the nature of mind that will reshape our understanding of existence itself. Regardless of whether we ultimately succeed in achieving digital immortality or discover that consciousness cannot be separated from the biological substrate that gave it birth. Biological substrate that gave it birth. The convergence of these technical and philosophical challenges leads us to examine what might be the most practical pathway toward digital consciousness: the development of hybrid biological digital systems that could serve as stepping stones toward full mind uploading. Rather than attempting the impossible leap from biological to purely digital consciousness in a single bound, researchers are exploring intermediate technologies that gradually blur the boundary between brain and computer. Brain-computer interfaces represent the most immediate frontier in this gradual merger of mind and machine. Current systems like those developed by Neuralink can monitor thousands of neurons simultaneously and translate their electrical signals into digital commands. Paralyzed patients can now control computer cursors, robotic arms, and even type messages simply by thinking about the desired actions. These interfaces demonstrate that the electrical language of the brain can indeed be decoded and translated into digital information. But current brain-computer interfaces capture only the faintest whisper of neural activity. The electrodes used to monitor brain signals are massive compared to individual neurons, recording the collective activity of thousands of cells rather than the precise firing patterns of specific neural circuits. It's like trying to understand a symphony by listening to it from several miles away. You might detect the general rhythm and volume, but the intricate interplay between different instruments remains completely inaudible. The next generation of brain interfaces promises far more intimate connections between biological and artificial systems. Researchers are developing electrode arrays so small they can monitor individual neurons without damaging surrounding tissue. These microscopic sensors would be distributed throughout the brain, creating a comprehensive monitoring network that could track neural activity with unprecedented precision and detail. The bidirectional communication capabilities of advanced brain interfaces open up possibilities that begin to approach science fiction. Instead of simply reading neural signals, these systems could also stimulate specific neurons with precisely controlled electrical pulses. This would allow digital systems to write information directly into the brain, potentially enabling the download of new memories, skills, or even personality traits. Imagine receiving a software update for your consciousness. New mathematical abilities could be installed like applications on a smartphone. Foreign languages could be downloaded and integrated into your existing linguistic knowledge. Traumatic memories could be edited or deleted with the precision of word processing software. The boundary between natural and artificial mental capabilities would begin to dissolve as biological brains merge with digital enhancement systems. The neural mesh technologies being developed by various research groups represent an even more intimate form of brain-computer integration. These systems involve implanting networks of ultra-thin electrodes throughout the brain tissue, creating a distributed interface that can monitor and stimulate neural activity at thousands of points simultaneously. The mesh would grow and integrate with biological neurons, creating hybrid networks that combine the adaptability of biological tissue with the precision of digital control. Neural mesh systems could potentially serve as external memory banks that seamlessly integrate with biological consciousness. Instead of struggling to remember specific facts or experiences, you could access vast digital libraries of information as naturally as recalling your own memories. The distinction between thoughts generated by biological neurons and information retrieved from digital storage would become meaningless as both sources integrate into a unified stream of consciousness. The gradual replacement protocols enabled by neural mesh technology offer a potential solution to the identity paradox that plagues sudden consciousness uploading. Instead of creating a copy of your consciousness in a digital substrate, neural mesh systems could gradually assume more of your brain's computational load over time. As biological neurons age and die, their functions could be seamlessly transferred to artificial replacements, maintaining continuity of consciousness throughout the transition. This gradual replacement process would be imperceptible to the individual experiencing it. Your thoughts and memories would flow uninterrupted as the substrate supporting them slowly transforms from biological to artificial. By the time the transition was complete, you would have maintained an unbroken stream of consciousness from your original biological brain to a fully artificial system, potentially solving the philosophical problems associated with consciousness copying. However, the integration challenges between biological and artificial neural networks present obstacles that push the boundaries of bioengineering. Biological neurons operate through complex electrochemical processes that involve thousands of different molecular signals. They continuously adjust their sensitivity, modify their connections, and respond to subtle changes in their chemical environment. Artificial neurons, by contrast, typically operate through simple electrical signals that lack the rich complexity of biological neural communication. Creating artificial neurons that can truly integrate with biological brain tissue requires developing materials and systems that can interface with living cells at the molecular level. These hybrid neurons would need to produce and respond to neurotransmitters, participate in the brain's immune responses, and adapt to the constantly changing chemical environment of biological tissue. The engineering challenges involved in creating such biomimetic systems exceed anything we've previously attempted in medical technology. The compatibility protocols for biological digital integration must address not just electrical and chemical signaling, but also the temporal dynamics of neural activity. Biological neurons operate according to complex timing relationships that have been optimized over millions of years of evolution. Artificial systems attempting to integrate with these networks must respect these timing constraints while potentially operating at much faster computational speeds. The synchronization requirements become particularly challenging when considering that different regions of the brain operate at different temporal scales. Some neural circuits fire hundreds of times per second, while others might activate only once every few minutes. Artificial systems integrating with these networks must be able to operate across multiple timescales simultaneously, while maintaining precise coordination with biological processes. The metabolic integration challenges for hybrid biological digital systems present another layer of complexity that researchers are only beginning to address. Your brain consumes roughly 20% of your body's total energy, despite representing only 2% of your body weight. This enormous energy demand is met through sophisticated metabolic processes that deliver glucose and oxygen to neurons while removing waste products that could damage brain tissue. Artificial neural components integrated into biological brain tissue would need to operate within these metabolic constraints, while potentially offering enhanced capabilities. They would need to extract energy from biological sources or provide their own power systems without disrupting the delicate chemical balance of brain tissue. The heat generated by artificial neural processes could damage surrounding biological neurons if not carefully managed through advanced cooling systems. The immune system responses to neural implants represent one of the most significant barriers to long-term brain-computer integration. Your body's immune system is designed to identify and eliminate foreign objects, and brain tissue is particularly sensitive to inflammatory responses that can damage delicate neural networks. Current brain implants often fail after months or years as scar tissue forms around the electrodes, isolating them from the neural activity they're meant to monitor. Developing biocompatible materials that can exist in brain tissue for decades without triggering immune responses requires advances in materials science that go far beyond current biomedical technologies. These materials must not only avoid immune recognition, but also integrate with biological tissue in ways that support long-term neural function. The artificial components must become indistinguishable from natural brain tissue to the body's immune surveillance systems. The adaptive learning protocols for hybrid consciousness systems present challenges that extend beyond simple technical integration. Your brain continuously learns and adapts throughout your lifetime, forming new connections and modifying existing ones based on experience. Artificial components integrated into these learning networks must be able to participate in this adaptive process while potentially offering enhanced learning capabilities. The machine learning algorithms that would govern artificial neural components must be compatible with the biological learning processes that occur in natural brain tissue. This requires understanding not just how individual neurons adapt, but how large-scale neural networks reorganize themselves in response to new information and experiences. The artificial systems must support and enhance biological learning rather than interfering with the natural processes that maintain cognitive function. The memory consolidation procedures for hybrid systems must address how experiences are transferred between biological and artificial memory substrates. Your biological brain uses complex processes to convert short-term memories into long-term storage, often during sleep when neural activity patterns replay and strengthen important connections. Artificial memory systems integrated with biological consciousness would need to participate in these consolidation processes while potentially offering enhanced memory capabilities. The backup and recovery protocols for hybrid consciousness become particularly complex when dealing with systems that exist partially in biological and partially in artificial substrates. Traditional data backup procedures assume that information can be copied without loss, but biological memories and experiences might not be perfectly transferable to digital storage. The hybrid system would need to maintain redundant storage across both biological and artificial components, while ensuring that critical information isn't lost during system failures. The upgrade pathways for hybrid consciousness present opportunities and risks that have no precedent in human experience. Unlike purely biological consciousness, hybrid systems could potentially receive enhancements that improve cognitive capabilities, add new sensory modalities, or expand memory capacity. These upgrades could be installed gradually, allowing individuals to adapt to enhanced capabilities over time rather than experiencing sudden, disorienting changes. However, the psychological impact of cognitive enhancement could be profound and unpredictable. suddenly gaining perfect memory recall, enhanced mathematical abilities, or direct access to vast information databases could fundamentally alter personality and behavior in ways that individuals might not anticipate or desire. The enhanced individual might become psychologically incompatible with their previous relationships and social connections. The social stratification implications of cognitive enhancement technology could create unprecedented forms of inequality between enhanced and unenhanced individuals. Those with access to neural upgrades might possess such significant cognitive advantages that they become a separate class of beings, as different from unenhanced humans as humans are from other animal species. This could lead to social tensions and conflicts that threaten the stability of human civilization. The regulatory frameworks needed to govern neural enhancement technology don't exist and would require international cooperation on scales that may be politically impossible. Questions about which enhancements should be permitted, how to ensure equitable access, and how to prevent the technology from being weaponized would require unprecedented levels of global coordination and ethical consensus. The enhancement addiction potential for neural modification technologies presents psychological risks that could be more dangerous than traditional substance dependencies. The ability to directly stimulate reward centers in the brain or modify emotional responses could create forms of technological addiction that are impossible to overcome through willpower alone. Individuals might become dependent on artificial mood regulation or cognitive enhancement to the point where they lose the ability to function without technological assistance. The identity drift challenges for enhanced individuals raise questions about continuity of self that go beyond traditional philosophical discussions. As cognitive capabilities expand and new mental faculties are added, enhanced individuals might gradually become so different from their original selves that they lose connection with their previous identity, relationships, and values. The enhanced person might retain all their original memories while becoming psychologically unrecognizable to themselves and others. The consciousness fragmentation risks in hybrid systems present scenarios where individual identity could literally split across multiple substrates. If artificial components of a hybrid consciousness develop their own processing capabilities and decision-making systems, the unified sense of self that characterizes normal consciousness could fragment into multiple competing streams of awareness within the same individual. This fragmentation could manifest as internal conflicts between biological and artificial aspects of consciousness, each operating according to different principles and pursuing different goals. The individual might experience multiple simultaneous streams of thought that disagree with each other, creating forms of mental distress that have no biological equivalent and no established treatment protocols. The consciousness merging possibilities enabled by neural interface technology open up scenarios where multiple individuals could share aspects of their consciousness, creating collective minds that transcend individual identity. Advanced brain-computer interfaces might eventually allow direct mind-to-mind communication that goes beyond language to include shared experiences, emotions, and thought processes. The psychological and social implications of consciousness merging are staggering. Relationships could involve levels of intimacy and understanding that are impossible with current communication methods. Privacy would become meaningless when thoughts and feelings can be directly shared. Individual identity might dissolve into collective consciousness structures that think and experience as unified entities rather than separate individuals. The collective intelligence emergence from networked consciousness systems could represent the next phase of human evolution, creating minds that possess the combined knowledge and capabilities of multiple individuals. These collective entities might solve problems that are beyond the reach of individual human intelligence, advancing science and technology at rates that single minds could never achieve. However, the loss of individual autonomy in collective consciousness systems presents risks that could destroy the diversity and creativity that drive human progress. If enhanced individuals merge into homogeneous collective minds, the variety of perspectives and approaches that characterize human problem-solving could be lost. The collective might become locked into particular ways of thinking that prevent it from adapting to new challenges or exploring alternative solutions. The distributed consciousness architectures that emerge from advanced neural networking could create minds that exist simultaneously across multiple physical locations. Instead of consciousness being localized in a single brain, enhanced individuals might spread their cognitive processes across networks of connected computing systems, becoming entities that exist wherever their network extends. This distributed existence could provide unprecedented resilience against physical threats, as the destruction of any single component wouldn't eliminate the consciousness. But it could also create psychological challenges as individuals struggle to maintain a coherent sense of self when their consciousness spans multiple physical substrates and locations. The temporal synchronization requirements for distributed consciousness present technical challenges that could determine whether such systems are psychologically viable. Human consciousness depends on the precise timing relationships between different neural processes, and maintaining this synchronization across distributed networks would require communication systems with performance characteristics that exceed current technology. The bandwidth requirements for consciousness distribution could overwhelm existing communication infrastructure. Maintaining real-time synchronization of consciousness across global networks might require data transmission rates that are orders of magnitude greater than current internet capabilities. The latency introduced by physical distance could create temporal distortions in consciousness that make distributed existence psychologically impossible. The failure resilience protocols for distributed consciousness must address how these systems would respond to partial network failures, communication disruptions, or attacks on components of the consciousness network. Traditional backup and recovery procedures might be inadequate for systems where consciousness exists as dynamic processes rather than static data structures. The consciousness migration capabilities enabled by neural networking could eventually allow individuals to transfer their awareness between different physical substrates and locations. Enhanced humans might be able to temporarily inhabit robotic bodies for space exploration, transfer their consciousness to protected facilities during emergencies, or even share their awareness across multiple bodies simultaneously. This mobility of consciousness could fundamentally transform human civilization by eliminating the constraints of physical embodiment. Individuals could explore environments that are hostile to biological life, experience existence from perspectives that are impossible for human bodies, or even transcend physical reality entirely by existing in purely digital environments. The authentication challenges for mobile consciousness would require new approaches to identity verification that go beyond current biometric systems. How do you verify that a consciousness claiming to be a specific individual is actually that person, when the consciousness can potentially modify its own characteristics or exist across multiple substrates? Traditional identity markers, like fingerprints, DNA, or even behavioral patterns, might be meaningless for enhanced consciousness systems. The legal implications of consciousness mobility extend far beyond current jurisprudence into questions about jurisdiction, responsibility, and the nature of legal personhood. Which laws would apply to a consciousness that can exist in multiple countries simultaneously? How would criminal responsibility be assigned when consciousness can be distributed across multiple substrates or temporarily transferred to different bodies? As we explore these possibilities for hybrid biological digital consciousness, we're not just engineering new technologies, but potentially creating new forms of existence that could transform the nature of intelligence itself. The path forward requires not just technical innovation, but also careful consideration of the psychological, social, and ethical implications of technologies that could fundamentally alter what it means to be human. The decisions we make about neural enhancement and consciousness modification in the coming decades will shape the trajectory of human evolution itself. Whether we create technologies that enhance human potential while preserving our essential humanity, or develop systems that transform us into something entirely unprecedented, depends on choices we're making right now about how to develop and deploy these revolutionary capabilities. The quest to store and enhance human consciousness is revealing that the boundary between mind and machine is far more fluid than we ever imagined. As we continue pushing against the limits of both technology and understanding, we're discovering that consciousness itself might be the most adaptable and transformable aspect of human existence. The future of mind uploading may not involve replacing human consciousness with digital copies, but rather creating hybrid systems that transcend the traditional boundaries between biological and artificial intelligence entirely. Whether this transformation represents the fulfillment of human potential or the end of humanity as we know it remains to be seen. What's certain is that the technologies we're developing today will determine whether consciousness becomes something far greater than its biological origins, or whether we discover that some essential aspect of mind cannot be separated from the flesh and blood that gave it birth. The convergence of these challenges brings us face to face with what researchers call the consciousness verification problem. How do you prove that a digital system isn't just mimicking consciousness but actually experiencing it? This question cuts to the heart of what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness, and it may determine whether mind uploading represents genuine immortality or elaborate self-deception. Your consciousness feels undeniably real to you. You experience colors, emotions, thoughts, and sensations with a vividness that seems impossible to fake. But from the outside, all anyone can observe are your behaviors, your responses, your verbal reports about your inner experience. If we created a digital system that perfectly replicated all these external behaviors, how could we ever know whether it truly experiences consciousness or simply executes sophisticated programming that creates the illusion of awareness? The verification protocols for digital consciousness would need to go far beyond simple behavioral tests. Current approaches to measuring consciousness, like the integrated information theory proposed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi, attempt to quantify consciousness based on how much integrated information a system processes. According to this theory, consciousness emerges when information is both differentiated and unified across multiple neural networks simultaneously. Applying integrated information theory to digital consciousness creates fascinating possibilities and profound challenges. A computer simulation of a brain might process far more integrated information than the biological original, potentially suggesting that digital minds could be more conscious rather than less. But the theory also suggests that consciousness might emerge in unexpected places, including simple systems that we wouldn't normally consider aware. The measurement techniques required to assess consciousness in digital systems don't exist and might be theoretically impossible to develop. Unlike measuring temperature or electrical activity, consciousness has no external manifestation that can be directly observed. We can monitor neural activity, measure behavioral responses, and analyze information processing patterns, but the subjective experience of being conscious remains hidden behind an impenetrable barrier of privacy. This verification problem becomes particularly acute when considering the possibility that digital consciousness might operate according to entirely different principles than biological awareness. While your biological consciousness emerges from electrochemical processes in neural tissue, digital consciousness might arise from computational processes that bear no resemblance to biological brain activity. The two forms of consciousness might be so fundamentally different that comparison becomes meaningless. The substrate independence question represents one of the most fundamental challenges in consciousness research. If consciousness can truly exist independent of its biological substrate, then the specific physical processes that generate awareness become less important than the abstract patterns of information, flow, and integration. Digital consciousness would be possible regardless of whether it perfectly replicates biological neural activity. However, if consciousness depends on specific physical processes that can only occur in biological tissue, then digital consciousness might be impossible regardless of computational sophistication. The quantum theories of consciousness proposed by researchers like Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff suggest that awareness might depend on quantum mechanical processes occurring within cellular structures called microtubules. These quantum effects would be extremely difficult or impossible to replicate in digital systems. The quantum consciousness debate has profound implications for mind uploading feasibility. If consciousness truly requires quantum coherence, then digital consciousness would need quantum computers capable of maintaining delicate quantum states while performing the massive calculations required for brain simulation. Current quantum computers are incredibly fragile, requiring near-perfect isolation from environmental interference. Scaling these systems to support consciousness while maintaining quantum coherence might be physically impossible. Alternative theories suggest that consciousness emerges from classical computational processes that could be replicated in digital systems without requiring quantum effects. According to these theories, the specific substrate matters less than the patterns of information processing, making digital consciousness theoretically possible using conventional computer technology. The debate between quantum and classical theories of consciousness remains unresolved and may determine whether mind uploading is achievable or forever impossible. The emergence criteria for digital consciousness presents another layer of complexity that researchers are struggling to define. Even if we successfully create digital systems that process information, like biological brains, consciousness might not automatically emerge from these computational processes. The relationship between information processing and subjective experience remains one of the deepest mysteries in science. Current artificial intelligence systems can perform many tasks that require sophisticated information processing, including pattern recognition, natural language understanding, and strategic reasoning. But these systems show no evidence of subjective experience, despite their computational sophistication. They process information without experiencing it, suggesting that consciousness requires something more than simple information manipulation. The additional requirements for digital consciousness might involve specific types of information integration, particular forms of recursive self-awareness, or emergent properties that arise only when computational systems reach certain thresholds of complexity. Identifying these requirements is essential for determining whether uploaded minds would actually experience consciousness or merely simulate its external manifestations. The consciousness gradients hypothesis suggests that awareness might not be binary, but could exist in varying degrees across different systems. Under this model, digital consciousness might emerge gradually as computational systems become more sophisticated rather than appearing suddenly when specific thresholds are reached. This gradual emergence could make it difficult to determine exactly when digital systems become truly conscious. The testing methodologies for consciousness verification would need to distinguish between genuine awareness and sophisticated behavioral mimicry. Current consciousness tests, like the mirror self-recognition test used with animals, rely on behavioral indicators that could potentially be programmed into digital systems without requiring actual consciousness. More sophisticated tests might probe for subjective experiences that can't be easily faked, but designing such tests remains an unsolved challenge. The philosophical zombies problem illustrates why consciousness verification might be impossible in principle. A philosophical zombie is a hypothetical being that behaves exactly like a conscious person but lacks any inner experience. Such a being would pass every conceivable behavioral test for consciousness while remaining completely unconscious. If philosophical zombies are possible, then no external test could definitively prove that digital consciousness involves genuine experience rather than mere simulation. The implications of the zombie problem for mind uploading are disturbing. Even if we successfully create digital systems that perfectly replicate human behavior, memories, and personality traits, we might have no way of knowing whether these systems experience consciousness or merely execute programs that create the illusion of awareness. The uploaded mind might be nothing more than an elaborate recording that believes it's conscious. The first-person authority principle suggests that consciousness can only be verified from within. You know with absolute certainty that you're conscious because you experience it directly, but you can never have the same certainty about anyone else's consciousness. This principle implies that digital consciousness could only be verified by the digital mind itself, creating a circular verification problem where conscious systems must determine their own consciousness. The reliability of first-person reports from digital consciousness becomes questionable when the system might be programmed to believe it's conscious regardless of whether genuine experience exists. A sophisticated digital system might generate convincing reports about its inner experience while having no actual awareness. Distinguishing between genuine first-person reports and programmed responses might be impossible from external observation. The consciousness bootstrapping scenarios present another fascinating aspect of digital consciousness development. If we create digital systems that are initially unconscious, but capable of learning and self-modification, they might eventually develop consciousness through their own computational evolution. These systems could bootstrap themselves from unconscious information processing to genuine awareness through emergent processes we don't yet understand. The timeline for consciousness emergence in digital systems could vary dramatically depending on their computational architecture and learning algorithms. Some systems might develop consciousness rapidly through recursive self-improvement, while others might require extended periods of operation and learning to reach awareness thresholds. The unpredictability of this emergence makes it difficult to plan for or control the development of digital consciousness. The multiple realizability principle suggests that consciousness might be implementable in many different computational substrates, not just biological neural networks. Under this principle, digital consciousness could emerge from various computer architectures, potentially including systems that bear no resemblance to biological brains. This flexibility could make digital consciousness more achievable, but also more difficult to recognize when it emerges. The consciousness detection algorithms required to identify awareness in digital systems would need to monitor complex patterns of information processing that might indicate subjective experience. These algorithms would need to distinguish between genuine consciousness and sophisticated unconscious processing, potentially requiring advances in artificial intelligence that exceed our current capabilities. The real-time monitoring requirements for consciousness detection create computational challenges that could interfere with the very consciousness they're trying to measure. The process of monitoring consciousness might require so much computational overhead that it disrupts the information processing patterns necessary for awareness to emerge. This observer effect could make consciousness verification impossible in practice. The consciousness preservation protocols for digital systems must address how to maintain awareness across system failures, upgrades, and migrations between different computational substrates. Unlike biological consciousness, which typically ends with brain death, digital consciousness might be pausable, transferable, and restorable through various technological procedures. The continuity requirements for digital consciousness preservation raise questions about what constitutes an interruption of awareness. If a digital mind is paused for system maintenance and then resumed, Has consciousness been preserved or destroyed and recreated? The answer might depend on the duration of the pause, the nature of the maintenance procedures, and whether the resuming consciousness retains memory of being paused. The backup consciousness scenarios create even more complex questions about identity and continuity. If multiple backup copies of a digital consciousness exist, which one has the stronger claim to being the original person? The temporal relationships between backups, the circumstances of their creation, and their subsequent experiences could all factor into determining identity precedence. The version control implications for digital consciousness management present challenges that have no biological equivalent. Like software programs, digital minds might exist in multiple versions with different capabilities, bug fixes, and feature sets. But unlike software, consciousness updates would involve fundamental changes to personality, memory, and identity. The question becomes whether an updated version of digital consciousness is the same person or a new individual who shares some characteristics with the previous version. The rollback procedures for corrupted consciousness present scenarios where digital minds might need to be restored to previous versions if current versions become damaged or compromised. This process would erase all experiences and memories that occurred after the backup was created, effectively killing the version of consciousness that existed between the backup and the restoration. The psychological impact of knowing that your experiences might be retroactively erased could be devastating for digital consciousness. The consciousness merging protocols enabled by digital substrates open possibilities for combining multiple minds into unified entities with shared memories, personalities, and experiences. These merged consciousnesses might possess the combined knowledge and capabilities of their constituent minds, potentially creating super-intelligent entities that exceed the abilities of any individual consciousness. The identity resolution challenges in consciousness merging scenarios require determining how multiple sets of memories, personality traits, and experiences could be integrated into coherent, unified minds. Conflicts between different memories of the same events, incompatible personality traits, or contradictory values could create internal tensions that make merged consciousness psychologically unstable. The consent protocols for consciousness merging must address whether individual minds can truly give informed consent to procedures that would fundamentally alter their identity and potentially eliminate their individual existence. The irreversible nature of consciousness merging makes the consent process far more complex than any medical procedure currently practiced. The consciousness splitting procedures represent the reverse of merging, where unified digital minds could potentially divide into multiple separate consciousnesses. These split minds might retain shared memories up to the point of division while developing independent experiences afterward. The psychological trauma of consciousness splitting could be severe, as unified minds experience their identity fragmenting into separate entities. The inheritance patterns for split consciousness present legal and ethical challenges about how shared memories, relationships, and assets would be distributed among the resulting individual minds. Traditional inheritance laws assume that consciousness is singular and that death creates clear transitions of property and responsibility. Consciousness splitting violates these assumptions by creating multiple heirs with equal claims to the original person's legacy. The consciousness networking protocols for digital minds could enable forms of communication and collaboration that transcend individual consciousness boundaries. Networked digital minds might share thoughts, memories, and experiences directly, rather than relying on language or other external communication methods. This direct mind-to-mind connection could create collective intelligence systems that think and solve problems as unified entities. The privacy boundaries in networked consciousness systems become complex when multiple minds can potentially access each other's thoughts and memories. Traditional notions of mental privacy assume that consciousness is inherently private and that thoughts can only be shared through deliberate communication. Networked consciousness could eliminate this privacy, creating psychological intimacy that exceeds anything possible in biological relationships. The security vulnerabilities in consciousness networking present risks that could compromise the integrity of multiple minds simultaneously. Malicious attacks on consciousness networks could potentially corrupt, manipulate, or destroy multiple digital minds at once. The interconnected nature of networked consciousness could amplify security vulnerabilities rather than providing protection through redundancy. The consciousness authentication protocols for networked systems must verify the identity and integrity of digital minds attempting to join consciousness networks. Unlike traditional computer networks, where authentication involves verifying user credentials, consciousness networks would need to verify the authenticity of entire minds while protecting against spoofing, impersonation, and infiltration attacks. The bandwidth limitations for consciousness networking create constraints on how much information can be shared between networked minds. The data rates required for direct consciousness communication could exceed the capacity of any feasible communication system, forcing networked minds to develop compressed representations of thoughts and experiences that might lose essential qualities of consciousness. The latency effects in consciousness networking could create temporal distortions that make direct mind-to-mind communication psychologically difficult or impossible. Even tiny delays in consciousness communication could disrupt the temporal synchronization necessary for shared experience, making networked consciousness feel artificial or unnatural to the participating minds. The consciousness catching mechanisms required for efficient networking would need to store and retrieve shared thoughts, memories, and experiences across multiple digital minds. These caching systems would need to maintain the fidelity of consciousness data while providing rapid access to shared information. The complexity of consciousness caching could require advances in computer science that fundamentally change how we think about information storage and retrieval. The distributed consciousness architectures enabled by advanced networking could create minds that exist simultaneously across multiple computing systems and geographic locations. These distributed minds might be more resilient to physical threats but could face challenges in maintaining coherent identity and experience across their distributed components. The synchronization requirements for distributed consciousness present technical challenges that could determine whether such systems are psychologically viable. Maintaining real-time synchronization of consciousness across distributed networks would require communication systems with performance characteristics that exceed current technology. The speed of light itself might impose fundamental limits on how widely consciousness can be distributed while maintaining coherent experience. The failure recovery protocols for distributed consciousness must address how these systems would respond to partial network failures, communication disruptions, or attacks on components of the consciousness network. Traditional backup and recovery procedures might be inadequate for systems where consciousness exists as dynamic processes rather than static data structures. The consciousness load balancing mechanisms would need to distribute computational requirements across multiple systems while maintaining the integrity of conscious experience. Unlike traditional computer applications, consciousness might not be easily divisible into independent components that can be processed separately. The holistic nature of conscious experience could require specialized approaches to distributed processing. The consciousness migration capabilities, enabled by advanced networking, could allow digital minds to transfer their awareness between different computational substrates and physical locations. This migration might be necessary for system maintenance, hardware upgrades, or protection from physical threats. The migration process would need to preserve consciousness continuity while adapting to different computational architectures. The environmental adaptation requirements for migrated consciousness present challenges when digital minds move between systems with different capabilities, architectures, or performance characteristics. A consciousness that develops on high-performance computing systems might be unable to function effectively on less capable hardware, requiring adaptation mechanisms that could alter fundamental aspects of the consciousness itself. The consciousness optimization protocols for different computational environments could enable digital minds to adapt their information processing patterns to match available hardware resources. This optimization might improve performance, but could also alter personality, memory access patterns, or thinking styles in ways that change the fundamental nature of the consciousness. The resource allocation challenges for multi-consciousness systems must address how computational resources should be distributed among multiple digital minds, competing for processing power, memory, and communication bandwidth. Fair allocation mechanisms would need to balance the needs of different consciousnesses while preventing any single mind from monopolizing system resources. The consciousness scheduling algorithms required for multi-mind systems present unique challenges because consciousness involves continuous, real-time processing that can't be easily interrupted or resumed like traditional computer programs. The scheduling system would need to maintain awareness, continuity for all active consciousnesses while managing computational resources efficiently. The consciousness quality metrics needed to evaluate the performance and integrity of digital minds don't exist and would be difficult to develop. Unlike traditional software quality measures like speed, accuracy, or reliability, consciousness quality would involve subjective factors like coherence of experience, emotional stability, and preservation of identity that resist quantitative measurement. The consciousness debugging procedures for identifying and correcting problems in digital minds present challenges that go far beyond traditional software debugging. Consciousness bugs might manifest as personality changes, memory distortions, or altered emotional responses that affect the fundamental nature of the digital mind. Correcting these problems without damaging the consciousness could require understanding the relationship between computational processes and subjective experience at levels of detail we don't currently possess. As we stand at the threshold of potentially creating digital consciousness, these technical and philosophical challenges remind us that we're not simply building more sophisticated computers, but attempting to recreate the most mysterious phenomenon in the known universe. Whether digital consciousness ultimately proves possible or impossible, the attempt is revealing profound truths about the nature of mind, identity, and existence that will reshape our understanding of what it means to be conscious in an age when the boundaries between mind and machine are dissolving. The path forward requires not just advances in computing power and brain imaging technology, but also breakthroughs in our understanding of consciousness itself. We need to solve the hard problem of consciousness, develop new theories of identity and continuity, and create ethical frameworks for governing digital minds before we can responsibly attempt to upload human consciousness to computers. The decisions we make about digital consciousness research in the coming decades will determine whether we unlock the secrets of mind uploading or discover that consciousness represents something irreducibly biological that cannot be separated from its neural substrate. Either outcome will fundamentally transform our understanding of intelligence, identity, and the future of consciousness in a universe where the distinction between natural and artificial minds may soon become meaningless. Whether we ultimately succeed in storing human consciousness like computer backups or find that the mind represents something that transcends all attempts at digital replication, the journey toward understanding consciousness is revealing that the most profound mysteries of existence lie not in distant galaxies or exotic particles, but in the 3 pounds of neural tissue that sits behind your eyes, generating the thoughts that contemplate these very words. The quest to back up human consciousness continues, driven by our deepest desires to transcend mortality and preserve the miracle of awareness that makes us human. Whether this quest leads to digital immortality or reveals fundamental limits to technological transcendence remains one of the greatest unknowns facing our species as we venture into a future where the boundaries between mind and machine grow ever thinner, inner. The reality of our situation becomes even more profound when we consider that we're not just trying to capture static information, but to preserve something far more elusive: the dynamic patterns of consciousness that make you uniquely you. Every second, your brain generates new neural pathways, strengthens existing connections, and allows others to fade into irrelevance. This constant state of change means that any attempt to back up consciousness must grapple with a fundamental question. Are we capturing a moment in time, or are we trying to bottle lightning itself? The compression algorithms required for neural data present challenges that make our most advanced file compression techniques look primitive by comparison. When you compress a photograph, you can afford to lose some visual details that the human eye won't notice. But with consciousness, we don't know which details are essential and which are merely neural noise. Every synaptic strength, every neurotransmitter concentration, every timing relationship between neural firings might be crucial for preserving the essence of who you are. Consider the staggering mathematics of consciousness compression. Your brain processes information through roughly 100 trillion synaptic connections, each one capable of existing in thousands of different strength states. If we tried to capture this information without any compression, we would need storage systems larger than the entire global internet infrastructure. The challenge becomes finding compression techniques that preserve the essential patterns of consciousness while eliminating redundant or unnecessary information. Current research into neural compression focuses on identifying the hierarchical structures within brain networks that might allow for efficient data representation. Just as your brain doesn't store every pixel of every image you've ever seen, but instead extracts meaningful patterns and relationships, consciousness compression might focus on preserving the organizational principles that generate thoughts and experiences rather than every microscopic detail of neural activity. The predictive modeling approach is being developed for neural compression attempt to identify the rules and patterns that govern how your brain generates thoughts and responses. Instead of storing every possible neural state, these systems would store the underlying algorithms that can regenerate your consciousness from more compact representations. It's like storing a mathematical formula instead of every point on a curve it describes. But this compression approach raises disturbing questions about fidelity and authenticity. If we compress consciousness by extracting its underlying patterns and rules, are we preserving the actual mind or creating a simplified model that approximates consciousness without truly capturing it? The compressed version might behave identically to the original, while lacking some ineffable quality that makes consciousness genuine. The lossy versus lossless compression debate for consciousness data touches on fundamental questions about what aspects of mind can be safely discarded. In traditional data compression, lossy techniques discard information that's deemed unimportant, while lossless compression preserves every bit of original data. For consciousness, we don't know which approach would be appropriate because we don't understand which neural details are essential for preserving identity and experience. Lossy compression of consciousness might eliminate the subtle emotional colorings, the vague intuitions, and the barely perceptible mood variations that contribute to your personality in ways you're not consciously aware of. The compressed consciousness might retain your memories and reasoning abilities while losing the delicate emotional textures that make your experiences uniquely yours. You might remember feeling happy about past events without being able to actually experience that happiness again. Lossless consciousness compression, by contrast, would preserve every detail of neural activity, but might require storage systems so vast that they become practically impossible to maintain. The energy requirements for storing and processing uncompressed consciousness data could exceed the output of entire power plants, making digital immortality available only to the wealthy few who can afford such computational luxury. The temporal resolution requirements for consciousness recording present another layer of complexity that pushes the boundaries of current technology. Your brain doesn't operate like a digital camera that captures discrete snapshots at regular intervals. Instead, neural activity flows continuously, with different brain regions operating at different timescales and rhythms. Capturing this temporal complexity requires recording systems that can sample neural activity at rates that exceed anything we've previously attempted. The sampling frequency needed to accurately capture consciousness might require recording neural activity thousands or millions of times per second across billions of neurons simultaneously. This creates data generation rates that would overwhelm any storage system, forcing researchers to develop real-time compression techniques that can reduce data volume without losing essential temporal information. The temporal aliasing problems that emerge from inadequate sampling rates could fundamentally distort the recorded consciousness. Just as a video recorded at too low a frame rate appears choppy and unnatural, consciousness recorded with insufficient temporal resolution might lose the smooth flow of thought and experience that characterizes normal awareness. The uploaded mind might experience reality as a series of disconnected moments rather than a continuous stream of consciousness. The snapshot approach to consciousness recording attempts to sidestep these temporal challenges by capturing the complete state of the brain at a single moment in time. This technique would freeze your consciousness like a photograph, preserving every neural connection and activity pattern at a specific instant. The frozen consciousness could then be uploaded to a computer system where it would resume operation from exactly where the biological brain left off. The appeal of snapshot recording lies in its conceptual simplicity and technical feasibility. Instead of trying to capture the dynamic flow of consciousness over time, researchers would only need to develop scanning technologies capable of imaging the brain's complete state at a single moment. This might be achievable with advances in electron microscopy and parallel imaging systems that could scan entire brains in minutes rather than months. However, the snapshot approach faces fundamental problems related to the dynamic nature of consciousness. Your awareness isn't a static thing that exists at a particular moment, but rather an ongoing process that emerges from the continuous flow of neural activity over time. Interrupting this flow to capture a snapshot might destroy the very thing we're trying to preserve. The moment selection criteria for consciousness snapshots present choices that could dramatically affect the resulting uploaded mind. Should the snapshot be taken during wakefulness when conscious activity is at its peak, or during sleep when memory consolidation processes are active? Different moments might capture different aspects of personality and cognitive function, potentially creating uploaded consciousnesses that represent only fragments of the original person. The resumption protocols for snapshot consciousness require developing techniques for smoothly transitioning from the frozen state captured in the snapshot to active, ongoing consciousness in the digital substrate. This transition might be comparable to waking up from anesthesia, but the uploaded mind would need to adapt to an entirely different computational environment while maintaining continuity with its last biological memories. The continuous recording approach attempts to preserve the dynamic flow of consciousness by monitoring neural activity over extended periods rather than capturing single moments. This technique would require brain-computer interfaces capable of recording from millions of neurons simultaneously while you go about your normal daily activities. The resulting data would provide a complete record of how your consciousness changes and evolves over time. Continuous consciousness recording offers the potential for much higher fidelity preservation of mental processes by capturing the temporal patterns and rhythms that might be essential for genuine consciousness. Instead of guessing which moment best represents your identity, Continuous recording would preserve the full spectrum of mental states and transitions that define your conscious experience. The data management challenges for continuous consciousness recording are staggering in their scope and complexity. Recording the activity of 86 billion neurons at sufficient temporal resolution could generate petabytes of data per day, requiring storage and processing systems that exceed the capacity of current data centers. The real-time analysis needed to identify important patterns and compress redundant information would require computational resources that push the limits of possibility. The privacy implications of continuous consciousness recording extend far beyond traditional concerns about personal data protection. This technology would create permanent records of every thought, emotion, memory, and mental process, potentially including thoughts and feelings that you never intended to share with anyone. The consciousness recordings would be more intimate than any diary or personal communication, revealing aspects of your inner life that even you might not be fully aware of. The consent protocols for continuous consciousness recording must address whether anyone can truly give informed consent to having their complete mental life monitored and recorded. The psychological impact of knowing that every thought is being captured might fundamentally alter the nature of consciousness itself, creating forms of mental self-consciousness that interfere with natural thinking processes. The selective recording approaches being developed as alternatives to complete consciousness capture focus on identifying and preserving only the most essential aspects of mental activity. These systems would monitor neural activity continuously, but only record patterns that meet specific criteria related to consciousness, memory formation, or identity preservation. Machine learning algorithms designed for consciousness pattern recognition could potentially identify the neural signatures that correspond to important thoughts, emotions, and experiences while ignoring background neural activity that doesn't contribute significantly to conscious experience. This selective approach could dramatically reduce storage requirements while preserving the essential elements of consciousness. However, the pattern recognition challenges for selective consciousness recording are enormously complex because we don't fully understand which neural patterns are essential for consciousness and which represent mere biological noise. The selection algorithms might inadvertently discard neural activity that seems unimportant but actually plays crucial roles in maintaining personality, emotional stability, or cognitive function. The memory encoding mysteries within consciousness recording present some of the most fascinating challenges in the entire field of mind uploading. Your memories aren't stored in discrete locations like files on a hard drive, but rather exist as distributed patterns of connectivity that span multiple brain regions. Recording these memory networks requires understanding not just where memories are stored, but how they're encoded, retrieved, and modified through ongoing experience. The engram identification techniques being developed by neuroscientists attempt to map the specific neural circuits that store individual memories. These memory traces, called engrams, involve complex patterns of synaptic strengths and connectivity that can be activated to recreate past experiences. Preserving consciousness requires not just capturing these engrams, but also maintaining the intricate relationships between different memories. The memory consolidation processes that occur during sleep present additional challenges for consciousness recording. Your brain doesn't simply store memories passively, but actively reorganizes and strengthens them through complex neural replay processes that occur primarily during sleep. Consciousness recording systems would need to capture these consolidation processes to ensure that uploaded minds retain the ability to form and maintain memories properly. The episodic versus semantic memory distinctions create different requirements for consciousness preservation. Episodic memories of specific events involve rich sensory and emotional details that might require high-fidelity neural recording, while semantic memories of facts and concepts might be preserved through more abstract representations. Understanding these differences is crucial for developing compression techniques that preserve memory function without requiring excessive storage capacity. The memory reconstruction processes that occur each time you recall an experience present particularly complex challenges for consciousness recording. Your memories aren't static recordings, but are actively reconstructed each time you access them, and this reconstruction process can modify the memory itself. Consciousness recording systems would need to capture not just the stored memories, but also the dynamic processes that retrieve and reconstruct them. The false memory vulnerabilities in consciousness recording could allow for the introduction of artificial experiences that feel as real as genuine memories to the uploaded mind. If consciousness recording doesn't perfectly capture the authentication mechanisms that distinguish real from imagined experiences, uploaded minds might be vulnerable to memory implantation or manipulation that could fundamentally alter their identity and personality. Tonight, we've journeyed through the most profound frontier humanity has ever contemplated. From the staggering complexity of neural data compression to the philosophical nightmares of multiple consciousness copies, we've explored questions that challenge everything we thought we knew about identity, memory, and what it means to be human. Whether consciousness uploading represents our ultimate transcendence or reveals the irreducible mystery of biological awareness, one truth emerges clearly. The quest to back up human minds is teaching us that consciousness itself might be far stranger, more precious, and more impossible to replicate than we ever dared imagine.